Today's video is all about restructures and business cases. You as an HR business partner, even as a manager and a senior leader, may be asked to do a team restructure or lead on a team restructure. Sometimes that can be a very small team to medium-sized team, or sometimes it can be on a departmental level where there is a holistic review of one department required. There are many steps that would have to be taken into account before you embark on a full-on restructure and drafting your business cases. You actually can download a restructure toolkit from my digital store, and for those of you who are Notion users, I will make sure I create it in Notion so you can actually get a link to download it to your Notion workspace as well. You may find yourself in a situation where your senior leadership team or a manager or a leader asks you to review a team because they are thinking about a team restructure. If you find yourself in this situation, the best advice is to ask them to pull together a business case. You could offer to do it with them or for them, depending on how big it is. But at the same time, before they actually decide to do something with it, it's important that they are challenged on their thinking and what they need to put in place and think about before you simply action their asks to do a team restructure. So step number one is definitely drafting a business case. If you are drafting a business case or working with someone who is drafting a business case, it's important that they use the right template. Any business case needs to have a background defined, as is situation, what we're trying to review and what actually exists currently as we speak that we believe is not working well. Once the current situation is nicely articulated, that's easy to follow and read to really understand what we currently have in place, the next steps is to proceed with why we need to go through changes. Why pretty much needs to articulate rationale for any business change. And this is very important to be so well articulated and defined, because if this does go ahead, you can include any description in your communication with employees, teams actually, who will have to be consulted about these changes, and they really need to understand rationale for changes and where the business is coming from, what the business is trying to achieve, and how they will actually go through making these changes happen in the workplace. Once we've defined the why and rationale as to why we're even thinking about having this change, the next steps of any business case needs to have a clear proposal. What is changing and how we're going to change it. So if there is going to be an impact on a team structure, it's quite important to explain visually what current team structure looks like and what a to be proposed team structure is going to look like. It's really important that employees can visualize this and that they can see what's going to remain as is and what's going to change going forward. Sometimes certain roles remain as is and you can label them as green, for example, in your structure charts. Sometimes certain roles are subject to a change or reduction, and those roles can be labeled, let's say, in red, so employees can clearly see which roles are going to be changed or which roles are going to be reduced. And for example, sometimes in a brand new team restructure, you can have brand new roles as well. And those, for example, could be labeled as blue, as an example. And that means that those roles will be available for people either to apply for or to be slotted in, depending on their skill set and capability. Where we have changes in our current roles, where they're changing and we need to look at responsibilities and accountabilities, where we are proposing new roles, it's quite important to work with your reward team to really establish as to what's changing. And often roles have to be job evaluated to really review as to whether there is indeed any change or not, and if there needs to be a regrade or not. I will actually do a separate video about job evaluations and methodology that could be used to job evaluate roles. So what I've just taken you through here is a full definition of any potential impact on individuals and individual roles. Every employee, when we're dealing with any team changes, any team restructure, really wants to know, am I impacted? What's going to change for me? And what do I need to do to secure a role in the new structure if my current role is impacted by these proposed changes? A business case can also have a number of options included. So option 1, option 2, option 3 and more. On average, what I've seen is an options paper with 3 options that is then put together and proposed and submitted to relevant department head or executive lead or a panel, depending on how you actually approve business cases in your organization. In my experience, this is normally pulled together, presented to a department head or executive lead, and then they can comment on which option is actually preferred option. In a major department changes, any executive lead would have to take these proposals and ideas to the executive team for further approval and conversation. Once the preferred option is approved, then we go into making it happen. So once we've gone through these steps, the final steps is to define a timescale of these proposed changes as to when we are going to start with team consultation, when are we going to start with individual consultation, what's the notice period we are giving to people, and when do we hope to go live with our new proposed team structure. So it's quite important to define as to what the timescales are going to look like for people, so they can really plan and think as to whether they are going to stay in the new team structure, whether they will have to go through the consultation process, or whether this actually makes them think as to what they would like to do in terms of next steps and potentially consider applying for other internal roles and potentially considering leaving the organization altogether. So to visually help people understand as to how this is going to look and feel, it's important that we define in brief terms what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, who is the owner, and by when it needs to happen. If in your current workplaces you have trade unions, the first step is to actually consult with them first. You cannot go and consult with your impacted teams because the first requirement is for trade unions to see these proposals, how you're going to do it, and for them to contribute and help the business deliver these changes. If you don't have trade unions present in your working environment, the next step would be to set up a team meeting where you can actually brief the relevant team as to what's been agreed, rationale for change, proposals fully defined, and next steps. So in a trade union environment, you consult with trade unions first, then team briefing, then individual consultation. Where you don't have trade unions present, you go to team briefing first and then individual consultation. Before we simply accept that department wants structural changes where there are potential redundancies and changes in roles, which we must try and avoid, it's never nice to be in this situation, and I think there are often all sorts of options that could be considered if a particular team or department or business is looking at reducing their financial cost. One of those could be reducing your overall training cost, cancelling internal or external courses that cost quite a lot of money. You can also discuss any subscriptions, any agency cost, anything that you believe is not needed and can save the team structure as it is. Another option that you can also consider is to suspend recruitment for a number of months to recover and really see how much money can be saved. If you have a regular attrition or natural wastage, as they often say, you may wish to do a predicted figure as to how many people are likely to leave business on a voluntary basis by resigning, and that will then give you an indication as to how much money could be saved over the next 12 months due to the predicted resignations. If this particular team you're looking to change and restructure receives overtime payments, work out as to what that predicted cost as well is going to be and consider cancelling overtime. And final step is if you indeed have to go through restructures and reduce the number of roles you have or completely change them where people would be directly impacted by these proposed changes, is to consider asking for voluntary redundancy. And what that means is you talk about the rationale, the why you're going through changes, what needs to happen in change, how it's going to look and feel, timescales. But at the same time, before you go into formal execution of the proposed changes, you could actually ask the team as to if anyone is thinking of leaving and if they would be interested in a voluntary redundancy. I have seen quite a lot of similar examples where departments would ask from time to time to avoid any compulsory redundancies, which really saves a lot of time for any team because there would not be need for any individual consultation and there would not be any fallouts towards the end of it, because there are people who absolutely say, yes, I'm thinking of leaving, I'm happy to go, and then you proceed with next steps to actually make sure that's all done legally and in a compliant way. But it does save you a lot of time so you don't have to go through compulsory changes. To avoid any confusion as to who needs to do what, it's quite important to define early on who is responsible, who is accountable, who needs to be consulted, who needs to be informed. And this is called the RACI model. In my Restructure toolkit, there is a template that can be used and populated to clearly define roles and responsibilities. What will line managers do? What will senior leadership team do? What will HR business partner do? Any HR managers, advisors, depending on the structure you work in, will do. Sometimes there could be an allocated project manager who will help you with steps and what needs to happen by when, which will help you report in a productive way to your senior leadership team. If there is no allocated project manager, you as an HR lead could step in and say that you are happy to lead on this project. If you have never led on any project before but would really like to do, you can download a project management toolkit from my digital store and you will have all information in one place. It will help you facilitate a meeting to make sure you list all the activities that need to happen, how you will actually run the project, how you will report progress, meetings and how often you need to meet, stakeholders that need to come along to your meeting, and how you're going to report progress to your senior leadership team. All in one toolkit. It's easy to use. You don't need to have any project management qualification. And in fact, I do find that us as HR business partners are also change practitioners, and it's important that we develop this skill set as well. I do find that in any restructure, local management will need a lot of support. So the more support and information you give them up front, the easier for you. And if you work in a structure where there are HR managers and HR advisors, they will certainly have to help you. But what every manager would want to know, what's required of me? What do I need to do for these one-to-one consultations? Is there a document? Is there a portal? Is there a frequently asked questions document? Can I share the business proposal so they actually get to see what's been proposed, why it's been proposed, what do I need to do for any initial team briefings? And once you've gone through all these steps of drafting a business case, getting your approval for the preferred option, briefing trade unions if you have them or not, the next steps are really to brief your local management team and really help them understand as to what they need to do. They directly manage all these people. They themselves could be impacted by all these changes, and it's important that they do feel supported. So the more documents, templates you give them, the better for you. Once the first team briefing is out of the way, the next steps is to set up one-to-one meetings where a line manager will have an opportunity to talk about that personal impact on the employee. There may be a relevant form that they need to complete to make sure they ask relevant questions. That is then submitted further to human resources team to gather in one place and really understand the outcome of these initial meetings. Once we've gone through the full consultation cycle and everyone has had an opportunity to understand the impact on them, the next steps is to give formal notices where they're required. Depending on the size of these changes and how many people are impacted and the size of these teams, best practice notice would be around 3 months or 90 days. People who have lost their jobs as a result of these changes will then have enough time to look at other internal opportunities and external opportunities. Towards the end of 3 months, as best practice notice, your team structure then goes live. In my next video, I'm going to take us through organisational design methodology. Sometimes, especially if it's a major department restructure, we do have to take that new proposal, new idea through an organisational design methodology where we are looking at processes, systems and people on a holistic level. And it does deserve a separate video, but it's very linked to how we then need to draft a business case, options that we're putting forward, which then ultimately become a restructure project. That's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, whether you have ever had to draft a business case and how you've gone about it, whether you've helped with any business cases, whether you've led on any restructures, team restructures, organisational restructures. I really would like to understand level you operate at and what else needs to be put in place so I can actually do better videos for you that will really bring you a lot closer to all these changes. I would like to add that I have led on very small team restructures and small changes to a big, large department restructures to then portfolio restructures as well, where more than 1,000 roles were impacted as a result of those changes. So a scale assessment is quite needed to really understand what steps you need to put in place, level of detail required for your business cases, and what the main purpose, what it seeks to achieve. Because sometimes you may go through all this analysis and you realize it's quite expensive to do all these changes, and then you have to manage within and rejig processes or systems to really make sure your teams and your departments operate as effective as possible. See you in the next video. Bye for now.